myself. So it is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening, and that is Mark Cole. He is the Associate Lecturer in the Department of History at Cleveland State University. He specializes in modern Europe and Germany, specifically the history of Nazism and the Holocaust, Jewish studies, as well as the histories of consumption and food. He's also the director of the OCHGE, and he'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. And so I am looking forward to tonight's talk, which is about propaganda, Nazism and propaganda. And like last time, it'll be Mark will be the main lecturer, but we'll also have a conversation. I encourage you to put your questions in the chat, and we will try to get to them as we go through. And then, of course, we will leave time in the end for even more questions. So, Mark, it's all yours.
All right, thank you very much. Nice to see some familiar names and some new names since last month. I'm going to pull up something here. Jody, we can see that?
I can see it very clearly.
Okay, good. Okay, so the OCHGE is the acronym for the Ohio Council on Holocaust and Genocide Education. We're here to help teachers get any materials and access to educational stuff that they might need. And Jody's also part of this, so we're always happy to help in any way that we can. I've been asked tonight to talk about propaganda and thinking about it in the context of Nazi Germany specifically, and its sort of role in the Holocaust, or how we might understand its role in the popularity of certain ideas. So I thought it might be good to begin with just sort of the basics and define what propaganda is. Propaganda is almost always thought of as a negative, but it actually can sometimes be neutral or even positive. I like to think of propaganda as exaggerated, oftentimes exaggerated, and the negative propaganda even contains falsifications. And these ideas, these falsifications or these exaggerations are displayed in a variety of ways. Tonight, we're going to look at a lot of visual propaganda because we're not I didn't want to send stuff for you to read, and we don't have a lot of time to play films and this sort of stuff. So we'll be looking at a lot of images, and propaganda could be delivered in a variety of ways, not just the visual material that we're seeing tonight. And the idea behind propaganda is it's supposed to get people thinking in certain specific ways, usually, and in the hopes that it can alter their behavior or somehow sway them into believing something that they might not have believed before or thought much about. When we look at propaganda as a whole, usually the propagandists are trying to elevate themselves or a key idea or their group or a certain person. And that usually comes at the cost of the group, it comes at the cost of the people who are not part of that group or who are challenges to an idea or a leader, as it were. And propaganda is effective oftentimes, limited but effective, because of tried, well-proven ways of going about it. If we study propaganda, we can see things like marketing and advertising in it, public relations, things that you would study in high school or in college classes today. They make use of ideas from mass psychology, trying to get people thinking in larger blocks than they sort of normally would. Adolf Hitler thought a lot about propaganda. In the 1920s, he long before he ever became dictator, he understood propaganda to be, to quote him, a very dangerous tool in the hands of the wrong people. And he didn't really ever leave that idea. He understood quite well that propaganda could be used effectively. And I've got this quote here. I'm not going to read the whole quote. I'll let you all read the quote. I'll just say that the essence of what Hitler is trying to say here is that propagandists don't want nuance. They don't want you thinking critically. And he rightly says, because if you add nuance and you think critically, you're probably not going to believe that you go along with the propagandists. You're not going to believe their side. It's not about, sort of promoting objective truths. In fact, if you do that, you're probably going to be working against what it is that you're trying to do. So he's, really clearly saying here that the exaggerations or the falsifications are an important part of that message. And the people that took on propaganda for Adolf Hitler were really quite good at it, and none more so than the propaganda minister, Minister of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, I guess is the official title of his office. And that man there is, of course, Joseph Goebbels. Goebbels was I would call him one of the sort of old fighters. He joined the Nazi Party early. He didn't fight in World War I like Adolf Hitler and some of the other ones. He was born with a deformed leg that kept him out of service. But he joined the party early, made a name for himself as a go-getter, and was really quite good at putting the Nazi message out there and showing the people exactly how serious they were, especially in fighting against the threat of communism and Bolshevism. Goebbels, who was also the leader of the Berlin area within the Nazi movement, oftentimes led SA thugs, the sort of paramilitary thugs, into working class neighborhoods, communist strongholds, and got into fights with them simply so he could go back out on the radio and write articles about how we're fighting and sacrificing ourselves. Look at our Nazi martyrs. This is what Adolf Hitler is doing for you. And Goebbels is largely responsible for creating what scholars think of as the Hitler myth. That is, the propaganda shows, no matter what form it is, shows Hitler in the same light every time. Everything from his seemingly asexuality, he doesn't take a wife, well, until the very end, but he doesn't take a wife. He always talks about how he doesn't have time for that. He's married to Germany and working for the German people. Is all he cares about is the German people. And the myth becomes so believable that when we read memoirs from everyday Germans in the 1930s, and the Nazi regime is doing something at the local level that the people don't like, we get statements from little old women who are saying, only if the Fuhrer knew what you were doing, you wouldn't like this, he would be on your case. And so in many ways, the propaganda and the creation of this myth separates Hitler from the rest of the Nazi regime, so that if anything bad happens, it's blamed on the party, it's blamed on everybody below Hitler, and Hitler somehow stands above that. And there's a British historian by the name of Ian Kershaw who came up with this idea, this concept of the Hitler myth, and it's really a provocative way of thinking about things. It's almost like nothing can stick to him, which is interesting. So I thought, now that we've talked a little bit about propaganda, what it is, and who were one of the most important propagandists of the time period, we might look at what the propaganda was supposed to reflect. And it's supposed to reflect aspects of Nazi ideology, what the Nazis believed. And if we were going to talk about Nazi ideology, we're talking about Hitler's ideology as well. Hitler was very social Darwinian in his thinking. He thought that races, that nations were in constant conflict, constant struggle with one another, and those that don't fight and fight their way to the top are going to be the ones that are going to eventually be taken over and go extinct. So a battle between races, a battle between the nation states. Less important for him as a social Darwinist was the battle between classes. He wanted to get rid of that idea, but the other two were quite important. The other part of his ideology, of course, is this idea that there are people out to get the Germans, that they have eternal enemies, and those would be Jewish people, Slavic people, who would do anything to get at and defeat Germany and sort of keep it down. And he very much believed that the wire pullers behind all of this was Jews who were using communism or Marxism to maneuver themselves in position to take over not just Germany, but the world if we allowed them to. And so in Hitler's mindset, he often likened um, these people, in particular Jews, with things that are hard to detect, that are very insidious, that can infiltrate the body and you don't even know it. So if you read some of the speeches and some of his late night table talks, these sorts of things, he talks about Jews as parasites or germs or gangrenous limbs that need to be excised or cut off. That comes out of Mein Kampf in particular, his political manifesto. So there was a competition between races. Some races are ascendant, some are inferior, and the Jews are sort of behind all of this. And what they are trying to do, according to Nazi ideology, is pick apart what they understood or what they called the Volksgemeinschaft. So Volksgemeinschaft is a word that means national community, is how I would translate it most of the time. I think there's also a racial component to it a lot of times as well. So sometimes you'll see it in literature as national community or national racial community, or sometimes just racial community. But after the seizure of power in 1933, they talked incessantly about creating a Volksgemeinschaft, a national community. And by national community, they meant a community of racially fit Aryans who were beneficial to Germany and to the society and moved it forward. And if you aren't part of the Volksgemeinschaft, you needed to be excised. You needed to be gotten out of Germany by any possible means. Another component of Nazi ideology is the idea that the Volksgemeinschaft itself, the national community, is stifled. It geographically, with its close borders, doesn't have enough room to grow and expand. And so another central part of Hitler and Nazi ideology was expansion through militarism. Our militaristic expansion, however we want to talk about it. And most of you have probably heard this term Lebensraum before, living space. They very much believe that after World War I, especially in the changing of the borders and removing some parts of what historically had been Germany, that they've defiled the race, they've defiled German lands by letting Slavs, for example, settle on it. And a core component, not just of Nazi ideology, but of fascist ideology, is this idea of expansionism, and one expands through military invasions, and this is how they got things done. I would say the last probably important bit of Nazi ideology was indeed anti-Semitism, but a specific type of anti-Semitism. It wasn't run-of-the-mill anti-Semitism. It's what one historian, Saul Friedlander, has called redemptive anti-Semitism. And it's this idea that Hitler is a redeemer. Nazism is a redeemer for all of the wrongs that have been done against it by these groups who are not part of the Volksgemeinschaft, above all Jews. Everywhere they looked, they understood Jews to be the sort of wire pullers behind the scenes who were really the ones that were making things work. And because the Jews had done so much damage to Germany, they needed to pay the price. And this is where this idea of redeeming, of redemptive anti-Semitism comes through. Jody, is there anything that you would add, or you would have another stressor in there, or an example or anything? You're muted.
I know that's hard. That's a rarity. But I think you've done a really great job of setting this all up. The one thing I think I would like to point out, especially with anti-Semitism, because this is so much in our thoughts now, and in our culture and talking about it, is that the Nazis racialized anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism had been around for a really long time. It's known as the longest hatred. And they used historic anti-Semitism to put their ideology of across. But of course, it really was, the Nazis who really, really racialized it. And I think that's something, for us to keep in mind, especially as we go through the rest of the talk this evening.
Mm-hmm.
Just one other thing, too, you were mentioning Goebbels, and We do know also that Goebbels was very much interested in American marketing techniques. He did look to advertising, and he considered propaganda an art form. So that's another, just another way of understanding like where they were coming from as well.
Yeah, highly, he was sort of, highly educated, a writer too, wrote a novel that wasn't very successful. He was quite, I would say academically minded. And this is one of the things that um, the more you learn about the Nazi regime and the members that make it up, and you realize just how many of them had advanced degrees and, they were sort of the best and brightest, you wonder how they sort of get down to this level so easily. And he's kind of a classic example of that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's something also too. I think that a lot of when you're teaching this, everybody seems to think that all Nazis were just like thugs. But the truth is, no, they were PhDs, they were lawyers, they
Mhm.
were people who, were educated. So that is one of the things that is is very chilling about this history as well.
Okay, let's see. So I'm going to go back. Let me see. I'll go forward here for a second. So I'm gonna talk now about kind of some of the key themes, ideas that are often in when we look at propaganda, when we analyze it, that are sort of reflected in the ideology that we just talked about. And here is an image that was kind of fairly common. And, it would be great if you guys typed in the chat, if there's something that you see in something like this. So I'm calling this the savior motif. Some people call it the messianic motif. But it is connected directly to this idea of redemptive anti-Semitism. It's this idea that Adolf Hitler has been sort of like, providentially chosen to come back to save Germany. Is there anything, and so the German caption is "Long live Germany" down here. Is there anything that from the group that, catches your eye that you see in here? And I'm going to pull up the chat and try and follow along with all this stuff. Yes, we've got a bird. I don't think in a Christian motif, it very usually would be a dove, a sign of peace. Here it's probably an eagle, not necessarily a sign of peace. A devourer of doves, as it were. But yes, we get this juxtaposition of the religious metaphor continues on in the symbolism here. A dramatic halo of light, absolutely. And I just got out of class and we were doing a different aspect of propaganda. And I was showing a film that Jody knows very well, Triumph of the Will, from Leni
Oh,
Riefenstahl. And I always show my students the opening clip where he's coming to Nuremberg on an airplane, sort of descending from the heavens. And the director, Leni Riefenstahl, catches the airplane casting a shadow down on Nuremberg, and it's in the shape of a cross. So this sort of cruciform, it sort of reinforces this kind of messianic or savior idea. Anybody else have anything in there? So I didn't miss anything. The Holy Spirit, yeah. Heavenly light shines on him, absolutely. This is sort of medieval flag. Yeah, I like that. And this is this is meant to be a scene, I think, from the Nuremberg rallies themselves. And if you know, Nuremberg is historically in Germany a really important medieval town. It's sort of like thought of as the essence of medieval Germany back in the good old days of the Holy Roman Empire. And so absolutely, if you get a medieval sort of feel for it, that's common in fascist thinking, is to hearken back to a past, sort of a romantic past when times are good. For Mussolini and the fascists in Italy, excuse me, the fascists in Italy, it was back in ancient Rome, when we really had things right and we controlled the world. And for Adolf Hitler and Nazism, it was back when, Germany controlled most of Europe. Hitler's, his arms echo the shape of swastika. Yeah, I see that. It has a movie poster quality. Absolutely. It's kind of animated. Yeah. In color. We don't see a lot of color. Absolutely. This is a very masculine movement. Machismo is really important in fascist thinking.
The man of the people, that's another motif as well.
He's dressed like his followers. You'll notice he's also, if you look behind his left hand, he's got his Iron Cross as a reminder that he was a World War I veteran. His rage is evident. I like that as well. Yeah.
And also too, you were talking about, Triumph of the Will, but the film she made after that, Olympia, or the Olympics, she makes a direct connection to Germany and the Greeks. Trying to, bring it back to the fact that that they are the direct descendant from the Greeks. And that's also a very important symbol that they use as well.
Yeah, and this idea of unity in numbers, of him looking like everybody else, it's really important. I mean, the Latin word fasces, the sort of bound sticks, the symbol of ancient Rome, the bound sticks around an axe, was this kind of symbolic part of ancient Rome that, as individuals, we're not very strong, but if all of us are in lockstep with one another together, it's much harder to break us. And that symbolism comes out in a variety of ways. He's got a lot of wavy hair. Yes. A very nice
He's
coif,
a
I think
wind,
they would call
it's
that,
he's
right?
yeah, he's windswept in this particular, he's kind of like, yeah.
And part of the propaganda too, that Goebbels reminded him of, was he had to have a certain stage presence. And so not just in this sort of a depiction, but when he's giving his speeches, he practiced in front of the mirrors, all the hand gestures. He watched other speakers to see what to do and what not to do. In Triumph of the Will, he's always high up on the podium and everybody's staring up at him like some sort of demigod type idea. So the mass of followers seem to go into infinity. This is one of the things they got very good at. It's like in the film Triumph of the Will, the parade would just go around the block and it would be the same people coming through, but it looked like it was just these endless throngs of people who were coming to see the Fuhrer.
Yeah, I think it's also important to know that every part of Triumph of the Will actually was staged. And so her camera angles, the lighting, the masses of people, all of that it was staged to do exactly what Mark is talking about right now. Really highlighting Hitler as that savior of Germany. And it's no surprise, it's no mistake either that they used the city of Nuremberg to fly over and to have, the rally that took place there. Nuremberg has significance not just to Nazi lore, but certainly to, it was a magnificent medieval city. It was a very important city in the Renaissance. Very famous artists like Albrecht Dürer were from Nuremberg.
Mhm.
The humanitarians were from Nuremberg. The first globe was created in Nuremberg. So Nuremberg is a very important place. So it's not a surprise that they picked that particular city either.
And of course, central to fascist ideology is there needs to be a strong man at the top.
Right.
It sort of oozes machismo. There has to be somebody who is willing to make tough decisions to deal with difficult problems. Somebody that can stomach that kind of thing. And so promoting him as this strong, firm, confident individual, and here with his hand on his hip, with underlying this is the sort of the mantra of the Nazi movement: one people, one empire, one leader. The fascist movements need that one individual who is going to wrench them from all of their problems, apparent problems anyways. Okay. So motif 2. We'll contrast this. So this would be the sort of ideal of what the Volksgemeinschaft, or that national racial community, would look like. This is a cover from a Nazi publication. And here again, we've got the eagle in the background, and it says the National Socialist German Workers' Party. So you probably, most of you know this, but the word Nazi comes just from the first two syllables of the German. So in German, it's Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, which is a mouthful even for Germans. And so they shortened it to Nazi, the first two syllables of the word national. And it says, so the Nazi party, protects or ensures the national community. And then this is an advertisement for how they're going to help people. And it says down here, comrades, if you need any advice or any help, just contact your local Nazi office and they will help you. And one of the reasons why the Nazi movement grows in popularity, even though never more than 37% in an open election vote for the Nazis. In the 1930s, they really do things that make a better life for Germans, and the popularity begins to grow. And you could go to your local group, Ortsgruppe there, and let's say you're a new mom and the baby won't latch on or something like that. They have women there that would help you do that. They have breast milk collection services. They have welfare offices. They have all of these things that would make it feel as though the regime really cares about you. And if the regime really cares about you and it wants to take care of you, it can't take care of everybody else. And it certainly can't take care of those people who are outside of the national racial community. So again, there's this strong propagandistic movement to try to define what is true and proper German. And then if you're not true or proper German, then you're outside of it. So the state benefits its citizens, and then those who are not citizens are not going to benefit from the state. And, the early passage of the Nuremberg laws, which were signed in Nuremberg, why we call them the Nuremberg laws, at one of those Nuremberg rallies that Jody was just talking about. The first part of the law defines citizenship by blood. And if you're not of German blood, you are no longer a citizen, you become a national, and you lose all of the rights and privileges and access to those types of benefits. And so it really meant something for both sides of the coin. Jody, do you see anything in here that you're with your
Well, I like to
by?
yeah, I like to use this poster with students because I think there's so much in it, especially as it refers to the family.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do we have time to ask our audience to put in the
Sure.
chat what they think they see, and then we'll go from there. But the mother hen imagery, a marital, yeah, an eagle. The eagle is the state, represents the state, and the sort of like the wings are encompassing the family. Yep, they're
Mm-hmm.
holding the eagle is holding them. Um, and there is religious imagery also in this poster as well. I don't know, Mark, do you talk about the religious imagery in this poster at all?
I'm assuming you mean like Mary and baby Jesus type thing,
Yep,
holding
yeah,
the babe.
right. Yep, you have the woman who does look like Mary and the baby Jesus, but also that the fact that the family is in that triangle, which
Mm-hmm.
suggests the Holy Trinity, the Holy Family. So yeah, that's another again with Nazi propaganda. They used Christian iconography, recognizable iconography, to pull people in for them to feel safe. So it's just another layering of how the Nazis used this type of iconography. And I also too, I had some students the other day who pointed out the little girl who's looking straight at us.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of this sense of kind their interpretation was be like us. This is the true family.
Right.
And then drawing you in, drawing your eye in.
Yeah, because it's not common in this sort of imagery for somebody to look straight at you, right? Or in artworks, they're usually, looking at some other object. I guess I hadn't noticed that. I mean, I noticed her before, but I didn't think about the triangle.
Yeah,
Yes,
and
all blonde hair,
yep,
Madonna and child. Yeah, Tim's got that's the Christian iconography motif there.
and they also have three children, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I don't want to, jump ahead if you were going to plan on talking about the Mutterkrass and how
I
women were
wasn't, but you
rewarded.
can go ahead right now because that's a good point.
Yeah,
She's not going to
so
quite get one yet, I don't think.
no, no, I think she might be at bronze level, but I think it's 3 for bronze. And then I think you need what, 10 for gold. But anyway, what I'm talking about and what Mark is talking about is in Nazi Germany, they very much were promoting women, motherhood, family. And so to encourage women to have children, you could be awarded a what's known as a Mutterkreuz or a Mother's Cross, which looked like an iron cross that like what Mark showed you that Hitler was wearing because he won
Hmm.
that in World War One. It was a military medal, but they created one for motherhood, in which the more children you bared, because you were basically bearing children for the state, the higher level you would get a cross, and they were bronze, silver, and gold. And
So
they were
I had to look it
Adolf,
up, Jody.
yeah, they were signed by Adolf Hitler on the back. So on the
Hmm.
back, it was signed by Adolf Hitler, and they're usually like a blue and white enamel, and they came in 3 different
So
levels.
the bronze, I thought it started at 4 because 3 seemed like you're not putting enough effort in for the state.
Effort out there, huh? Okay.
So the third class or the bronze is 4 or 5 children. With 6 or 7, you move up to silver, and then 8 or more, you get the gold cross. And there were women who took this very seriously because they were celebrated in open ceremonies and this sorts of things. But there were also many Germans. They referred to it as the Rabbit Award. They saw it as as sort of ridiculous and a trick, and they called it out for propaganda. And under their breath, they would whisper the Rabbit Award. So Joanne says children, church, and kitchen. Yeah,
Yep.
Kinderkirche, Küche
Yep.
in the German. So that's the nice way of saying barefoot and pregnant. I think we would translate that to modern American English. That was the role of women, absolutely. Or it's supposed to be the traditional role of women.
Especially in a fascist state, not just under Nazism, but fascism in general.
Yes, I might even say in patriarchal societies in general, because when it comes to women, I don't think they were so different. Okay, so motif 3 would be those who do not fit into the Volksgemeinschaft, those people who are actively trying to, hurt Germany in some way or another. And this was a common poster, a common belief done in a million different ways that we see. And in the German there, I guess I didn't translate it, it says behind the enemy powers, the Jew. And so you've got the flags there. So I'd like you all to tell me what you see, what resonates with you. Is those in the chat?
Mm-hmm. Um, Mark, this poster was done in what, 42 or 43?
Yeah, it's early in the war, I think. Yes.
Because I also think it's interesting in terms of the timeline as
I
well.
think it has to be at least 42 because the United States is on there. So it'd have to be sort of post Pearl Harbor, I'm guessing.
So we have some interesting things that allies are controlled by Jews. The Jews um, are hiding
Kim is
behind the Allied powers. The Jewish man, a bridge between Great Britain, US, and the USSR. Cartoonish character-like features. The Jew is behind everything.
cartoonish character-like features. Yes. So, and I think last month I talked or we mentioned about the protocols of the Elders of Zion, this anti-Semitic
Yep.
forgery that purports that the Jews control everything, the infrastructure of the world. They're behind all of this. They're the wire pullers, and that's what's being suggested here. So, obviously, in the Soviet Union, being a Marxist informed, government, but the idea also would be to anybody that they didn't like, whether they thought they were controlled by Jews either. Although they did often refer to President Roosevelt as President Rosenfeld, to suggest that he was sort of like a closeted Jew or something like that, or that people like Chaim Weizmann or somebody who was a scientist in Britain at the time would have would have been influencing the way the British government was obstinate against the Germans. And as most of you know, they tried to, Hitler couldn't understand why the Brits would go against him, and why they didn't want to be an ally and partner with him early on.
This is really interesting. Someone made a comment about the Star of David on a chain. Its position relates it to time, like a watch, and the
Mhm.
oversized chain slavery. I'm not sure about that, but I do think it's interesting that it is there like a pocket watch. Do you have any insight on that, Mark?
I've seen, some other anti-Semitic imagery from like Poland in particular. I think the one I'm thinking of was, and uh, this caricature of an obese Jewish guy, which obviously means he eats more than he can possibly, he takes more than he ever gives back. They're a glutton, sort of a common idea within it, and always dressed very well. And much of the anti-Semitic propaganda would then show like the real working class family, who are, of course, they're wearing rags and they're skinny as a bone, and they can't possibly afford a gold chain, or so there's usually a pocket watch or a really nice watch sticking out on the wrist, although wristwatches weren't a big thing back then. But I think that's what they're going after. Look at how wealthy he is. Suit, gold chain, top hat, bow tie.
And I think too, it really goes to this notion of the Jew as the capitalist, right? I mean, we
Mm-hmm,
know from the protocols of Elders of Zion that they're equated both with capitalism and with communism. You really can't be both, but that's the fallacy of anti-Semitism and the lack of logic. The Soviet flag is fraying. That is interesting too.
mm-hmm,
Yeah, it really is about this sinister Jew who's that shadowy figure who is behind everything, who's pulling the strings, they're the puppet master, and making him to be this looking like capitalist, cosmopolitan looking. All of the anti Semitic tropes are being put on play here.
mm-hmm. This comment about the Soviet flag fraying, if this is 1942, then, the German army has been doing very, very good in the Soviet Union. If this was 1943, they're not doing as good anymore. So maybe it is symbolic of, the Soviet Union is being torn apart after the Operation Barbarossa and the invasion in 1941, and before things start going south a little later on. Okay, anything else in the chat? I don't see anything. So let's go to other motif that is here. This one is Rassenschande, which translates to race defilement. And this was one of the things that, as Jody mentioned, Nazi legal scholars often look to the United States for, inspiration in its racial policies. And when the Nazis looked at the Jim Crow South, for example, in the United States, we had the one drop rule where, one drop of black blood made somebody black. The Nazis thought that was even too extreme for them. And they were, sometimes even sort of envious of American, race legislators, because you could, it was more obvious to tell if somebody was black than white. And the problem for them was that the Jew could pass, that is, they could pass for being Aryan. And, they would say this quietly behind closed doors, which of course very much flies in the face of what they said publicly, that you can tell a Jew just by looking at, the nose or the obesity or whatever it might be. But this was one of the things that very much scared them about the Jew. Because they could assimilate, they could then breed into society. They used the word miscegenation back then. And they looked to the Jim Crow South and its anti-miscegenation laws, which didn't allow Black people and white people to get married and have children. And they created those same laws, those same anti-miscegenation laws, the Nuremberg laws. it also hints to this idea of the Jewish male being hypersexual and always victimizing German women as well. And here at the top of this is a special issue. It says there's a special issue coming out about race defilement, because even though the Nuremberg laws have passed and it forbids intermarriage and sexual intercourse between Jews and non-Jews, they understand that it's still happening. And so they think there needs to be some more public education in this area. So this is a special issue from Julius Streicher, who is one of the most rabidly important anti-Semites in the Nazi regime. I mean, he was so over the top anti-Semitic that people like Goebbels thought he needed to calm down quite a bit because he did it in a very sort of thuggish Luddite way. And so this idea of racial defilement, I mean, we can see it in a variety of ways. So if any of you would have your students read the Nuremberg laws themselves, they're very short. They're probably, I don't know, 200 words or something like that, both of the laws combined. And one of the interesting ones I always thought was, I can't remember which section it's in, but it says that Jewish families may not hire a German servant girl under the age of 45. And I thought, that's oddly specific, that year, 45. So what would you all make of that? If I had it in front of me, I would read it. I might be able to find it, the exact law, but that's roughly what it is. So why do you think it would be forbidden, a law would be passed as part of the Nuremberg laws, which do not allow Jewish families to hire German women to work in their households under 45 years old? Any ideas we can throw in the chat? Tim put up a link to the Nuremberg laws.
Childbearing age, breeding age.
Yeah, I like it. I don't know that that's the first one, but I would, I don't know. Do most women go into menopause at 45?
I'm just going to say, as a woman over 45, I am just deeply offended by this whole conversation. But I think it has a lot. I think we all know where this is leading.
Yeah, it's deeply misogynistic legislation, right? Because the sort of assumption there is a woman who is over 45 is not sexually viable anymore, or
not a temptress.
Yeah, so I think that's probably I think that's probably first and foremost, and then maybe the childbearing age stuff comes into it, that is. But again, you see in the illustration at the top, this sort of, dark, ominous threat to the blonde, apparently probably blue-eyed German women, right? So this idea that they're predators, that Jews are predators or parasites of different types. And if Jewish blood continues to contaminate German blood, it's going to continually bring down German civilization. And this is the point that they want to make time and time again. And again, I think it's interesting that they have to do this special issue where they say, even though right at the top they say we passed the law in 1935, yet Germans are still doing it. What's going on here? So obviously Germans aren't listening very well to not to the Nuremberg laws in some instances.
And I think there's a thing in the chat that about the film Birth of a Nation, and one of the themes of the white woman jumping off the cliff rather than being defiled by a black man. And we do have, there is racial imagery in the United States of very similar to this, with the black man being the predator, instead of, here we have a Jewish man, but there's no mistake that he is it looks like he's black. There's no mistake there, because you have to remember, under Nazi racial laws, they didn't see Jews as white. So that's something else that you have to understand, that they were equating them with, black people as well.
Yeah, they really don't use the term white at all.
No.
They talk about Aryans or Nordic people. The white concept is a very American idea. And I think we kind of saw this in the current Whoopi Goldberg affair, right? Differences in understanding race and in terminology and the importance of terminology. I saw something come up in the chat about, yes, you can tell that she's not into this.
Yeah.
This isn't consensual. She's being taken advantage of, absolutely. Maybe in our last the last segment of this, when Marty does Degenerate Art, there's a very famous poster of what's supposed to be a black man, a jazz player, but it's a monkey wearing a sort of American outfit. And he's got a star on, a Star of David on as well. So this idea that, you know, jazz music and Americanism and all of the bad stuff is being brought on by these other races and sort of all manipulated by Jews behind it. And you know, you see sometimes you see many of these aspects of Nazi ideology coming together in really kind of complex ways that make you shake your head.
And these are still very much in play today. There are memes and things on social media that relate back to this very, very type of anti-Semitism, and especially in which Jews are controlling, like, any kind of Black Lives Matter protest. George Soros is behind all of those. Supposedly, that's like the rhetoric. And so you have to understand that this notion of Jews being, again, controlling other minorities is very much still in play today. So none of this has actually gone away, even though
Yeah,
we're
no,
looking
I
at
mean,
historic examples.
as recent as Colleyville, right? The guy in Colleyville thought that by doing his actions that Jews controlled the world and they would be able to get his sister out, right? This is the salience with which the protocols of the elders of Zion and all of this thinking still very much has today. And maybe before I forget about it, Jody at one point will put in the link a link to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, which has sort of a little lesson plan on propaganda. And there are some sheets in there that you guys could use with your students on how to sort of pick apart propaganda, how to know what's fact, belief, or impressions. But also they have a part where you can sort of go and get some memes from social media and start looking at them as well, and have the students kind of pick them apart, and they can see how these ideas are still, as Jody said, very much prevalent and still here, and sort of easily used. And kind of what's scary about it is, with the internet and Twitter and Facebook and these sort of giant social media giants, we're talking about propaganda sort of old school. If the Nazis had a propagandistic machine like social media today, it would be kind of unfathomable what their reach would be, right? And so that's kind of an important thing to think about, because you can get the message out there so quickly now, and there's not a lot of vetting of the material that goes through this, and I know you all know this. There was a few years back, Sacha Baron Cohen gave a talk at an ADL meeting, and he called social media and the internet this massive propaganda machine. I think that was like 4 or 5 years ago. He was already calling them out, and I don't think that it's gotten any better. I don't know that these the people who are in charge are really all that interesting in curbing some of this stuff, because it doesn't really seem like they are.
Well, the issue is too, one of the things that we do know, because we've been working on it, is the fact that, you get something on social media that is anti-Semitic or racist, and by the time they can get to pulling it down, it's already been around the world once or twice. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the problem with social media. By the time we react to it, or the people who are in charge, I'm not letting them off the hook by any means, but I'm just saying it's really hard, because once you might react to it, but it's already out there, and people are sharing it over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And to Mark's point, the other thing that we should be remember is the Nazis used every aspect of media that they had at the time:
Mm-hmm.
radio, film, all of it. Also, too, they did have TV early on. However, it didn't go very far because they wanted to use the technology for the war efforts, and so they stopped working on it. But they were able to watch the Olympics on TV in like a theater. It wasn't an individualized viewing; it was more of a group viewing. But anyway, just so we think about now, but back then they used every aspect of media that they had available to them as well. So I'm gonna give you back the PowerPoint here, Mark, so that we can talk about this also very important poster.
Are we back on?
We are.
We got 7 minutes. I'm going to do this in two. One of the other aspects that we don't think about oftentimes are um, the first victims of the Nazis were, they weren't other races. They were Aryans. They were just Aryans who weren't productive. They weren't a productive member of the Volksgemeinschaft, of the national community. And this comes from a monthly magazine. It's an advertisement, propagandistic advertisement from something called The New Nation or The New People. And it says, over his lifetime, this hereditarily ill individual will cost the Volksgemeinschaft, the national community, 60,000 Reichsmarks. And then it says, Volksgenosse, comrade, that's your money too. So the idea behind here is, of course, that there are people in society who are not helping us out. They're not productive. They're actually drains on society instead of productive members of society. And here they're thinking about in World War I as well. There was a massive shortage of hospital beds, nurses, doctors, all of these things that they thought added up to their loss in the war, and they wanted to make sure that would never ever happen again. And in the wartime preparations, they cooked up this idea that became known as the T4 program, a secret euthanasia program, which was to empty, it's to put it crassly and coldly, it was to empty out the hospital beds and the amounts of medicine and crutches and all of those sort of things by killing the mentally and physically handicapped. I could have just as easily put up a math problem from a 6th grade math book that would do this kind of this math as well. This person, cost this, and 60,000 Reichsmarks is a lot. Most German, working class people with a good job would never make that in a lifetime. To make 1,000 Reichsmarks a year, you would have had a really good job. So most people could work their entire life and never get it. So that number is really important as well. Do you notice anything about the dress of the individuals there? I'm looking at the chat. I'll answer the question. So I would call this the uniform of the bourgeoisie. So it's not that he's just being taken care of. He actually has a suit and a tie on. I think they're trying to make a point there that this money is being wasted in many, many ways.
Also, too, Mark, I think also too, one of the other things we have to also remember too that Jews were also equated with people with disabilities too.
Yes.
Um, So anybody, like you said earlier, anybody who they did not, that they didn't feel had, what did they call it, the right to life? They would equate with Jews as well. So that's, again, it's all this normalization, thinking of the Jew in all these different ways that are a drain on their society. Did you want to answer the question about what percentage of people in Germany support Nazi racial policies against Jews, discrimination, and actual murder of Jews? What percentage of Germans supported the euthanasia program to murder the disabled? I don't know that you have all those answers, but I know we could talk if you want to.
I don't think anybody, or at least I certainly wouldn't know what percentages.
Yeah.
The euthanasia program, though, certainly was not supported. Once it is no longer a secret, there's a Catholic bishop from Munster, von Galen is his name. He publicly from the pulpit begins to call them out on this program, saying, okay, these people are worthless eaters to you now. Who next is going to be a worthless eater? Is it going to be the World War I veteran who can't work anymore? And so this is one of those examples where the Germans spoke up and the regime backed down. And we have many of those examples where if people would have just stood up and said something and say they're not going to take it, then we know that the Germans, that the Nazi regime were very sensitive to popular opinion, and they would have backed down probably. They did in the T4 program as well. It goes underground, and they pick it back up in Poland after the invasion of Poland and start cleaning out the asylums there. But yeah, certainly was not, it was gone, had gone way too far. They were not on board with that. That's kind of I'm going to skip this one and this one since we're kind of running out of time. And Joshua's question, leads to this sort of big take home. How effective was Nazi propaganda? Scholars really, I wouldn't say there's a consensus on this. What they would say in the case of at least Nazi Germany is the people who believed it or the people who were affected by it were the ones who already had some of these ideas to lesser or greater degrees. That is, they already kind of understood that Jews were not the greatest of citizens to have living in Germany. They might have been mild anti-Semites or something like that. You couldn't have talked them into hating somebody or something that they'd never heard of before, right? Propaganda can't do that. Propaganda it doesn't work in those ways, and the human brain doesn't work in those ways either. The idea also that Nazi propaganda created like automatons or zombies or something like that, the evidence that we have suggests that that's not true either. It doesn't brainwash people into thinking something totally brand new. It just sort of massages the things that they already may be thinking. And what I think the take-home message is, what makes propaganda so effective is that if it's persuasive enough to just get the public to not react. So to go back to Josh's question about, well, how many supported this and how many, it's not so much if they supported it, is if they would just acquiesce, if they would become complacent, if they would look the other way, they wouldn't do something for their neighbor, then the propaganda is effective, right? And it's often said, that the road to Auschwitz is paved with indifference. And I think when it comes to propaganda, that's absolutely true. The propaganda muted the feelings that people might have had for their friends, one-time friends and neighbors, and made them become bystanders in essence. Jody, did you want to add anything else?
No, I think you've hit on it. I think the one thing I of course will say one thing for those teachers out there. When you are teaching propaganda, the reason that we teach it is to get people to think critically, to get your students to think critically about what they're seeing, and they can apply it to the world today. And then that's what when you're talking about propaganda, the Nazis were hoping that you wouldn't think too much about it, that you would look at it and go, yeah, or you would normalize it and just become, as you said, sort of immune to it, or sort of just like it's there, right? So normalization and rationalization, yeah, that's exactly, Rebecca. So I think that's something important to think about. That's how we use this when we're teaching. I think that's how Mark uses it. I know that's how I use it, and I'm sure others too. That we want people to analyze it so that they can think critically, not just about what they saw back then, but what they're seeing now.
That's why I think that analyzing, memes that our students are seeing constantly on their phones, and if you get into the wrong algorithm and the same styles of memes keep coming up and it becomes ordinary to them, and it becomes almost obvious to them, and then they begin to have these associations and assumptions that aren't rooted in fact or anything. They're just rooted in this, the influence of the propaganda. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending. I think we're running a little late. We're 2 minutes past.
But well, thank you, Mark. I thought it was an excellent explanation of propaganda, and I know that just in the chat, I can see that people really took a lot away from it. It's always my pleasure to be with you and discussing these topics. Next time you will be on March 10th. We have our next one, which will be about how the Nazis were influenced by American legal precedents, and that will be hosted by you. And the speaker
Ken
is
Ledford from Case Western will be talking about it. He's an expert on German law.
And so we'll be having that discussion. We'll dig deeper into that next month. Jacob already put a link to sign up for that particular talk. And you can find more of these links on our website and also the Maltz's. I want to thank the Maltz Museum of Jewish Heritage and for partnering on this talk this evening. Unfortunately, they couldn't come tonight live, but they, of course, are our partners, and we're very proud to work with them and glad that we are doing this series together. So I hope you all have a great night and a good week, and we'll see you on March 10th. Thank you again, Mark. Thank you so
Yep.
much.
Thank
Have a good
you.
night,
Bye, everybody.
everyone.
Have a good night.